Picture the Pacific skies in 1942, a graveyard of burning American aircraft spiraling into an endless blue. Japanese Zeros danced through the air with deadly grace, their pilots seasoned warriors who ruled these heavens without question. Our carrier pilots faced an enemy that seemed invincible, their outdated fighters outmatched in nearly every engagement. The losses mounted daily, good men, skilled aviators, consumed by an enemy that controlled the sky like it was their birthright. But deep in a Long Island factory, engineers were racing against time to build a weapon that would flip this nightmare on its head. One aircraft, 6 months, total dominance. We were losing the sky, and with it, we were losing the war. When Japan struck Pearl Harbor, they didn't just catch us off guard. They proved they owned a technological and tactical advantage we hadn't anticipated. The Mitsubishi A6M0 wasn't just another fighter, it was a masterpiece of engineering philosophy. Weighing barely 6,000 pounds fully loaded, it could outturn, outclimb, and outrange nearly anything we put in the air. Its pilots, veterans of the war in China, had perfected their craft through years of combat experience. They flew with a confidence born of countless victories. At the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942, our F-4F Wildcats fought valiantly but were systematically outperformed. The Zero could turn inside our turning radius, climb faster to altitude, and had the range to escort bombers deep into our defensive perimeters. Our pilots watched helplessly as Zeros maneuvered onto their tails, their 20mm cannons tearing through American aircraft with brutal efficiency. At Midway a month later, we won a strategic victory by sinking 4 Japanese carriers, but our fighter pilots paid in blood for every Zero they brought down. The kill ratio hovered around 1-to-1 at best, a war of attrition we couldn't afford. Our pilots developed desperate tactics. Never dogfight a Zero, use dive and zoom attacks, rely on ruggedness over maneuverability. These were survival strategies, not winning strategies. Grumman's Wildcat could take punishment and keep flying, but it was heavier, slower, and less agile. We needed pilots to be exceptional just to stay alive, let alone dominate. Squadron commanders issued strict orders: avoid turning engagements at all costs, use altitude advantage, break off if the enemy gains position. These were the instructions of an air force fighting defensively in a war that demanded offense. The psychological toll was crushing. Every time our aviators launched from a carrier deck, they knew they were flying inferior machines against superior pilots. Maintenance crews watched their friends take off, never knowing who would return. We were holding the line, but barely. Something had to change, and it had to change fast, or the Pacific would become a Japanese lake. In the summer of 1941, before Pearl Harbor even happened, Grumman's engineers saw the writing on the wall. They'd been receiving combat reports from the Flying Tigers in China and Royal Navy pilots who'd encountered Japanese aircraft. The message was clear: we needed something bigger, faster, and meaner than the Wildcat. Leroy Grumman himself drove the project with singular focus. The design philosophy was revolutionary for its time. Build the fighter around the most powerful engine available, prioritize pilot survival over every ounce of weight, and make it so simple to fly that newly trained pilots could master it quickly. This wasn't about creating an elegant aerial dancer. This was about building an airborne tank that could deal death and bring our boys home. The team selected the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, an 18-cylinder monster producing 2,000 horsepower. This wasn't just an incremental upgrade, it was nearly double the Wildcat's power. Engineers worked around the clock, testing configurations, refining aerodynamics, and obsessing over weight distribution, but power alone wouldn't win. Grumman's engineers obsessed over details that would keep pilots alive: armor plating behind the cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks that wouldn't explode when hit, and a cockpit positioned high on the fuselage for excellent visibility. They studied combat reports from every engagement, incorporating lessons written in the blood of pilots who didn't make it home. Robert Hall, Grumman's chief engineer, later recalled, "We built the Hellcat with one goal: make it so our average pilot could beat their best pilot. That meant forgiveness in the design, stable gun platform, docile landing characteristics for carrier operations, strong enough to survive battle damage that would destroy other aircraft. The landing gear was incredibly robust, designed to absorb the brutal impacts of carrier landings even when the aircraft was shot full of holes." The first prototype flew on June 26, 1942, just 3 weeks after Midway. Test pilot Bob Hall pushed the aircraft hard, reporting back that it handled beautifully and had power to spare. The Navy was so impressed they ordered it into production immediately, skipping normal testing protocols. By October 1942, production Hellcats were rolling off the assembly line in Bethpage, New York. From blueprint to frontline fighter in less than 18 months, a stunning achievement born of desperate necessity and American industrial might. The F-6F Hellcat was a brute wrapped in elegant engineering. At its heart roared that R2800 engine, propelling the 12,500-pound fighter to 380 miles per hour at 22,000 feet, 50 miles per hour faster than the Zero. But speed was just the beginning. The Hellcat could climb at 3,500 feet per minute, matching or exceeding the Zero's climb rate despite weighing twice as much. This was power-overwhelming physics. The engine's reliability was legendary. It could take battle damage, run hot, and still bring pilots home. Armament transformed the combat equation entirely. 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns, 3 in each wing, delivered a weight of fire that could shred an enemy aircraft in seconds. Each gun carried 400 rounds, giving pilots ample ammunition for extended combat. Later variants carried 2,000 pounds of bombs or 6 rockets, making the Hellcat a devastating ground attack platform. The Zero carried only 2 20mm cannons and 2 7.7mm machine guns. Lethal, but nothing like the Hellcat's broadside. Where the Zero sacrificed everything for performance, no armor, no self-sealing tanks, no redundant systems, the Hellcat was built like a battleship. Armor protected the pilot from behind and below. Fuel tanks sealed themselves when punctured. The airframe could absorb punishment that would tear other fighters apart. Combat reports documented Hellcats returning to carriers with entire sections of wing shot away, control surfaces shredded, engines trailing smoke, yet still flying. One pilot landed with over 200 bullet holes in his aircraft and walked away without a scratch. The comparison was stark. The Zero was a samurai sword, light, deadly, but fragile. The Hellcat was a broadsword, heavier but unstoppable once it closed to striking range. In a turning fight at low speed, the Zero still held advantage, but Hellcat pilots didn't need to turn. They could climb above, dive down with superior speed, fire their devastating guns, and climb away again before the Zero could react. This boom and zoom tactic, impossible in the Wildcat, became standard doctrine in the Hellcat. Perhaps most importantly, the Hellcat was predictable. It didn't have vicious stall characteristics. It landed on carriers without trying to kill inexperienced pilots. It was maintainable by crews working in tropical heat on pitching carrier decks. It was, in every sense, a weapon system designed for total war. September 1st, 1943, Marcus Island. Our Hellcats entered combat for the first time, launching from USS Independence and USS Essex. Within minutes, the legend began. Lieutenant Commander Edward Butch O'Hare, already an ace in the Wildcat, led his squadron into a formation of Japanese bombers. What followed wasn't a dogfight, it was an execution. The Hellcats tore through the enemy formation with a ferocity that stunned both sides. Japanese pilots, accustomed to holding the advantage, found themselves outmatched in speed, firepower, and survivability. American pilots reported that their guns were more accurate, their aircraft more stable, their confidence absolute. That first engagement ended with overwhelming American victory and 0 losses. But the true revelation came during the Gilbert Islands campaign in November 1943. Over Tarawa, Hellcats encountered 0 pilots expecting another even contest. Instead, they met an aircraft that could dictate the terms of every engagement. American pilots used what became known as boom and zoom tactics, diving from altitude with superior speed, firing accurately from their stable gun platforms, then climbing away using superior power. Japanese pilots tried to force turning engagements, but Hellcat pilots simply refused, using their energy advantage to control the fight. The kill ratio told the story. Where Wildcats had struggled to achieve parity, Hellcats were averaging 5-1, then 10-1, then beyond. Commander David McCampbell, the Navy's top ace, shot down 34 enemy aircraft, 9 in a single day during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. On that October day in 1944, McCampbell and his wingmen encountered a formation of over 60 Japanese aircraft threatening the American carriers. They attacked repeatedly, McCampbell's guns firing in controlled bursts, his aircraft dancing through defensive fire. When his ammunition finally ran dry and his fuel gauge read nearly empty, he'd personally destroyed 9 aircraft and broken up an attack that could have crippled the carrier group. His wingman accounted for 6 more. 2 Hellcats had defeated a force 30 times their number. Pilots reported a transformation in combat psychology. In Wildcats, survival required constant vigilance and perfect technique. In Hellcats, they hunted. They sought combat rather than endured it. The aircraft's forgiving nature meant pilots could focus on tactics and marksmanship rather than fighting their own machine. Squadron ready rooms buzzed with aggressive confidence instead of grim determination. While day fighters grabbed headlines, a specialized variant was revolutionizing a different kind of warfare: the darkness. Japanese bombers had learned to attack our carriers at night, when our fighters were grounded and our ships were vulnerable. These nocturnal raids caused chaos, forcing entire task forces to maneuver wildly, disrupting operations and occasionally scoring devastating hits. We needed eyes in the darkness, and the Hellcat provided them. The F6F-3N and F6F-5N night fighter variants mounted AN/A-PS-6 radar in a pod on the starboard wing. This crude but effective system could detect enemy aircraft up to 4 miles away, giving pilots the ability to intercept bombers invisible in the Pacific night. It wasn't easy. Pilots had to interpret glowing blips on a small scope while flying on instruments, managing their aircraft and preparing for combat. But the Hellcat's stable flight characteristics made it possible. Lieutenant Commander William Henry led VFN 76, one of the first dedicated night fighter squadrons. On a moonless night in February 1944, Henry stalked a Japanese bomber for 20 minutes, closing slowly to visual range using only his radar. When he finally saw the dark silhouette against the stars, he fired a single burst. The bomber exploded, lighting up the night sky. Henry's squadron would account for dozens more, turning the night from a Japanese advantage into an American hunting ground. These night fighter Hellcats didn't just shoot down bombers, they shattered Japanese confidence. Enemy crews knew that even under cover of darkness, American fighters could find them. Raid frequencies dropped. The psychological impact was profound. The Hellcat had taken away the night itself. The Hellcat didn't just win dogfights, it rewrote our entire Pacific strategy. Before the Hellcat, carrier task forces operated with constant vulnerability. Japanese land-based aircraft could strike our carriers while our shorter-ranged fighters struggled to provide adequate defense. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz had to plan operations around this limitation, accepting risks that made every carrier precious and every operation a calculated gamble. With Hellcat squadrons aboard, our carriers became mobile fortresses. The combat air patrol could extend further, stay up longer, and destroy threats before they reached the fleet. This allowed Nimitz and Admiral Raymond Spruance to press forward with island-hopping campaigns that would have been suicidal a year earlier. They could bring carriers within striking distance of Japanese strongholds, knowing their Hellcats would dominate the sky. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 demonstrated this transformation completely. Japanese Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launched over 400 carrier aircraft in what he believed would be a decisive blow against the American fleet. Instead, he sent them into a meat grinder. American Hellcats, vectored to intercepts by radar-equipped ships, met the Japanese formations far from the carriers. What followed became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Over 300 Japanese aircraft destroyed in a single day for the loss of fewer than 30 American planes. Some Hellcat pilots shot down 5 or 6 aircraft in a single mission. The sky became a slaughterhouse. This wasn't just a tactical victory, it was the death of Japanese naval aviation. They lost not only aircraft, but irreplaceable veteran pilots. The institutional knowledge that had made Japanese aviators so formidable in 1941 to 1942 evaporated in hours. They would never recover. Japanese carriers would sail again, but they would do so without effective air wings. The Hellcat also changed how we thought about pilot training. Because the aircraft was so forgiving and so survivable, we could send younger pilots into combat sooner. The Hellcat's stability made it an excellent gunnery platform even for less experienced aviators. Where Japanese training programs took years to produce an elite pilot, we could produce effective Hellcat pilots in months. This industrial approach to air warfare, mass-producing both aircraft and competent pilots, overwhelmed Japan's artisanal system. Morale across the Pacific Fleet soared. Carrier pilots went from dreading encounters with Zeros to actively seeking combat. This psychological shift was as important as any technical specification. Commanders could plan offensive operations knowing their fighters would clear the sky. By the time Japan surrendered, Hellcats had destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft, more than any other Allied fighter. The final kill ratio stood at 19-1, a dominance unprecedented in military aviation history. But the Hellcat's legacy extended far beyond its kill count. It established principles that would define fighter design for generations. First, survivability matters as much as performance. A pilot who survives a battle can fight tomorrow. A dead ace helps nobody. Second, reliability and maintainability win wars. The Hellcat's rugged simplicity meant more aircraft available for more missions. Third, design for your pilots, not for engineering elegance. The best aircraft is the one average pilots can employ effectively. These lessons directly influenced post-war American fighter development. The F-8F Bearcat, designed as the Hellcat's successor, continued the philosophy of powerful engine, heavy armament, and pilot protection. The F-4U Corsair, initially rejected for carrier use, was refined to match the Hellcat's forgiving characteristics. Even early jets like the F-9F Panther inherited Grumman's design philosophy: build it tough, keep it simple, make it deadly. The Hellcat also revolutionized how we thought about the integration of aircraft, tactics, and technology. Radar-directed fighter interception, pioneered with the Hellcat, became standard practice. The concept of using fighters for both air superiority and ground attack, which the Hellcat proved viable, became doctrine. Modern multi-role fighters owe their existence to the Hellcat's versatility. Perhaps most profoundly, the Hellcat demonstrated that wars are won by systems, not just by heroes. Yes, there were aces, McCampbell, O'Hare, Harris, but the Hellcat's triumph came from making every pilot dangerous. It democratized air superiority, turning it from an art practiced by an elite few into a capability available to hundreds of carrier pilots. In 24 months, one aircraft transformed the Pacific from a contested battleground into an American domain. The Hellcat roared off carrier decks like a steel predator and returned the sky to those who built it. It saved countless lives, shortened the war, and proved that when engineers, pilots, and purpose align, the impossible becomes inevitable. That's not just aviation history. That's the story of how innovation changes everything overnight.